Hi, it's Peter Chapman from SKUFood, and I want to welcome you to another one of our SKUFood recipes for success. And we're doing things a little differently this week because in this new environment that we're all operating in, we have to be flexible. And as I keep telling people, we just have to kind of go with the flow and work with play the hand that we're dealt, I guess is the best way to put it. So we had a few issues with our webinar setup this morning, and when we went into to try to find it and get ready for the webinar today, it wasn't there. So after trying to look at some different options with support and trying to solve the problem for you, we still don't have a solution. So what I'm going to do is pre-record the webinar for you today, send it out to everybody so that you can all get at it, and you can watch it, I guess, when it's a little more convenient for you, as opposed to being here live with you. But as always, I'm always here to answer your questions for you. So if you do have any questions about the session today, by all means, shoot me an email, peter@skufood.com, or you can give me a call at 902-489-2900. And I'd be happy to answer your questions, because I know that today's topic, sales forecasting in the new food industry, there are questions. And one of the biggest challenges is that sales forecasting for every item is unique. And that's the reality. But what I'm going to do today is try and share some insights into what's been going on and help you figure out how to look at your sales for the future. So we'll dive in and get going with that. So the first thing is that we have to accept that shopping for consumers today is a totally new world. This is the front door of one of our local stores here. And I got to be honest with you that lately, one of the most challenging things for me is not going to the stores. And I respect that our public health officials are telling us that the fewer people who are out will help as a society, that we slow this thing down. So we have to respect that. So I've been staying home. I do go get our groceries once a week, either doing it in person, or for the last 2 weeks, we've also done it online. So I haven't even been to the stores for probably 10 or 14 days, which might actually be a record for me, but that's reality. And I'm trying to work in a new world, the same as you're trying to work in a new world. So, but we do have to respect for and appreciate for consumers that shopping for groceries is totally different than it was before this whole thing happened. So if you go to our local store here, this is what you'd see on the door, and I'm sure you see it on the front of almost any retail outlet for food or anything else right now, if they're open. So you see the messages, stop, you can't go in if you have any symptoms, and they're limiting the amount of people in the store. So a lot of times now we're waiting outside in line. And once you get inside, it's a totally different shopping environment. We see that most people are they don't want to talk to anybody. They've got their head down. A lot of them are shopping with a list. They're only going once a week because that's what they're being instructed to do. So it's a very different environment, but we have to accept that and figure out how do we do our sales forecasting in this new world. So there are a lot of variables. So we're going to explore each one of them, and we're going to talk about how I see they're impacting the shop. And again, when we're going through this, you really have to think about how it applies to your specific product, because every category is different in terms of whether it's a positive or a negative impact on the category and ultimately on your sales forecast. So the first thing that's happened is this huge shift away from food service. And there's a photo of our family last year. We were out for supper at one of the local, it was actually a restaurant in a golf course. It's a great spot to go eat. And eating out in our society was just part of something that we did. And probably, if I was to think of the split, probably restaurants were 20% of the food industry volume. And that has really almost disappeared. And we see restaurants who are still trying to do a lot of takeout, but it's got to be a fraction of what they were doing in prior to all this happening. So let's talk about the impact that it has on the category and what's going on. So we know, you can see even in Ottawa alone, there's just a headline from the Ottawa Citizen where we had 21,000 people in the restaurant industry have lost their jobs since this started. And you can extrapolate that out across every market. We're seeing just it's so sad, all these people who worked in that industry and were creative and an integral part of the food industry in terms of, we saw, that's where we would see development, that's where we would see items introduced, and then you introduce it and then it becomes more of a mainstream retail kind of item. So anyway, hopefully just temporarily that is on hold, and we will see it return at some point. But the reality is right now that restaurants are just not doing the volume. So what we did have in our food industry was probably about a 70-30 split between retail and food service. And in food service, you would have restaurants, you would have institutional, that kind of thing. So probably what we're looking at now is probably more a 90-10 split. So 90% of food is being bought at retail and 10% is being still supplied through institutions like healthcare or prisons would get counted into that number. And there is still some, like we said, takeout business being done by restaurants, but not, probably 90%. So if you think about that 20% shift in the market, and 20 divided by 70 is about a 28.5% change of the volume in the markets that shifted from food service to retail. So we can't say every item in retail is going to be up that much. That's not the reality. You have to think, so, what percentage of that could impact your product, your category. But overall in the market, we're seeing that much of a shift from food service to retail. So another thing that's happened, and we experienced it there in the middle of March, where we went into stores and went, whoa, what's happened? Consumers had all this panic buying and they were hoarding products. And we know that toilet paper has been used as a kind of a poster child of this whole sort of point in history from a shopping perspective. But we do know that a lot of categories like canned goods and pasta and some of those kind of things, where people really did buy up a lot of inventory in a very short period of time. So we have to try to figure out what is the impact on your category. So it's unique to the category. So if you're in the I'll use the toilet paper example. If you're in the toilet paper category, you know that people stockpiled a ton of product. You knew how much was in the system, you knew how much had been shipped, and then you can estimate the use for that. And we've all seen some of the estimates of how much toilet paper people are going to use and that kind of thing. Now, one thing that probably has changed is that we have a lot more people at home. So people are working from home, kids are home from school, a lot of those kind of things. So we do have increased usage at home, even in the toilet paper category. So you have to look at your category and say, okay, how much hoarding actually happened? And then try to estimate how much people are going to use. So if you're in the canned goods category, again, you would know how much inventory you had shipped into the system. You knew when your customers called for a panic order to refill the warehouse and get the stores restocked. So you know that there might have been in normal times, perhaps a 2-week supply of inventory between the warehouse and what was in the stores. So how long will it take them to use that? And will they use it up over maybe 4 weeks, that kind of thing. So you have to try to make some estimates that work within your category. And again, we do have a template which I've developed, which is just a simple Excel sheet. And I'm going to go through that at the end of the session today to show you how to use it. And it will be attached to the email that you receive with this recording. So you can start to try to put that into your specific perspective. So we'll address that when we go through the template. Another thing that we've seen is that public health officials and our civic leaders are telling us to stay home. They're requesting that if you go out for the necessities like food, which is obviously a necessity, that you limit it to 1 trip per week and 1 person from the household goes out and goes to the grocery store. So Google actually released some mobility statistics, which it's interesting how they know where we are and how often we're out. I'm not going to get into that debate right now, but I will share some of the numbers with you, which were interesting in terms of their ability to tell us what's going on with consumers who have smartphones. So what they told us overall across Canada, that grocery pharmacy trips were down 35%. And this would have been up prior to Easter weekend. They released these figures. So they were down 35% over the same time last year nationally. And you can see there are some differences regionally. Atlantic Canada is lower, and I know I live in Nova Scotia, and I know that our premier was very upset when these numbers came out, because we are probably the worst offenders here in Nova Scotia, where our trips to grocery and pharmacy are only down 7%. And when they're telling people to stay home to reduce the chances of this virus spreading, I know that was pretty frustrating for them. So in Atlantic Canada, if you average New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, although it's not a perfect average because it should be a weighted average, but just a rough, just a basic average is more around, the trips are down 20%. But you can see in parts of Canada where the virus has had a bigger impact, a more devastating impact, like Quebec, trips to stores in Quebec were down 44%. So people are really much more listening to the advice and saying, stay home, shop more online. And we know also in the denser urban markets like Toronto, Montreal, the options for delivery are better than they are in provinces where it's more of a rural, where consumers are more spread out. So, but you can see how much trips are down, and that has a big impact on shopping, because people are not in the stores buying impulse like they used to. So we really have to factor that in about how much that's going to decrease the shopping. Now, we've also seen another phenomenon with this, which perhaps some of the retailers who'd made the big investments in online shopping are paying some dividends with that investment now. So estimates are from different sources that probably online shopping has increased to over 10% of the total market. And that would have been less than 2% in Canada prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. So that's a huge increase. The retailers are trying to grapple with that because they've got to have people who pick orders, they've got time slots. And I know when we've gone online to do our shopping, you really are looking at a week out now. That's the reality in our marketplace. And I don't know, in some other markets that might be different, but what we're looking at is that you really have to plan a week out if you're going to do online shopping. So when we think about the impact of that online shopping increasing fivefold, just in a relatively so short a period of time, like 3 to 4 weeks. So what does that impact on the shop? So one thing it does is you have to really think of your meal planning 2 weeks out. And in Canada, we're just not used to doing that. So consumers are probably reducing maybe some fresh items, that kind of thing, because they're thinking, well, you know, if I plan this meal and that meal, so that's one thing. So the shop is changing because of that 2-week lead time. We also have to think about the customer capabilities. So how many orders can they pick in an hour, and that kind of thing. And if you go to the store and you do see the people who are picking these orders, they're trying to hire fast. So these are probably inexperienced people. So they're limited by their staff and the capacity that they have. And they're trying to ramp that up all the time. Another big challenge with online ordering is substitutions. So if you place your online order and perhaps you order broccoli, and if we're used to going to the store, and if you go to the store and for whatever reason they're out of stock on broccoli, you would probably switch your purchase to another green cooking vegetable. You might buy beans, something like that. Well, with online ordering, that doesn't happen. So if they're out of stock, the consumer does not substitute. And so if you think of yourself, if your product, perhaps if you're the number 2 brand in a category, and usually if the consumer goes and they're not happy with either the in-stock position or the price or something about number 1, you'll get the purchase because they'll substitute your product for the other one. Well, that doesn't happen with online shopping, because if it's not there, they don't pick it. So that may hurt or hinder your sales in some way. So we're seeing brand loyalty changing, because in online shopping, a lot of those orders are generated with your previous shopping history. So you go back, you look at, what did I order last time? Okay, I'll have that again, I'll have that again, I'll have that again. But if it's not there again, they don't pick it. So we have to be thinking about, how do we get in front of the consumer's mind so that when they do go in to do an online order, that your brand is top of mind for them, or your product is top of mind for them. So that's something to think about. So how do you connect outside the store so that you're either connecting on social media, which is probably one of the most obvious places where you should be connecting, where people are not going out, they're not going to see your message in other places. So social media is a natural, and you need to have your product, your brand, perhaps a recipe you shared or something like that, a way to use your product, top of mind for consumers. So when they are doing an online order, they go, oh yeah, I want that because I'm going to make something, or I want that brand. So it's a different way of thinking, and you have to understand for your items, have you made the change or not? Another thing we need to be aware of when we're thinking of sales forecasting is consumer confidence. And we know that unfortunately, millions of people across our country are losing jobs because of the impact of the COVID-19, where businesses have simply been shut down. I know in the news today, 1,000 municipal workers in our community were laid off, and it's having such an effect. And we know that when people are worried about money, which rightfully so they should be, they just don't have the confidence to buy like they used to. So if you think about lining up outside of Costco right now, and this was last week, I took this photo in the snow. You can see where people are lined up outside. But if you're standing in that line and you just have in the back of your mind, either I'm not going to be working like I was, or I'm not going to get the hours in my job that I'm used to, or perhaps my spouse has been laid off, you just don't have the confidence to go in and fill your basket like you used to, and you're going to shop differently. So we know when it comes to consumer confidence that there'll probably be less impulse buying. People are not going to go, oh, look at those berries, or look at those, look at that. That's, I'm gonna put that in my cart because I've always wanted it, and oh, there it is. People are just, now they're going to say, I can't do that right now because I just don't feel like I have the money to be able to do that. So if your product is one that relied on impulse buys, chances are you're going to be hurt in sales in the next period of time. Another thing that's impacted is brand loyalty. We're going to see where people will trade from brand to a different brand if the price is cheaper. And perhaps you were always somebody who bought this brand in the category and there was a premium for that. Well, if people don't have the confidence in their income and they don't have the comfort level that the money's going to be in their bank account, they're going to start to trade to less expensive options. And also private label is another consideration that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, private label is a less expensive option in a category. So if you are a manufacturer of private label products, you may see that the impact of sort of that lower consumer confidence may actually drive a slight increase in your volume. So we have to factor that in. And then the other thing with consumer confidence to me that's going to have, and this is actually probably more of a positive impact, it might slow sales a little bit, but it's actually a positive impact for the overall food industry, is that food waste will probably go down as a result of this whole pandemic, because consumers are looking at products and saying, you know what, I'm going to get an extra day out of that. Or perhaps in the past they might have said, well, that doesn't look that good, I'm going to go get a new one or something like that. But now if money's tighter, they're going to be more frugal and they're going to find options. They're going to say, well, instead of using a lettuce for one salad, perhaps I'm going to stretch it and I'm going to get 2 salads out of it or something like that. So there are going to be changes to the buying patterns, and probably less food waste as a result of what consumers are facing today in their household. And we also know that the shopping basket has changed. And you go in the store and you see sections like flour wiped out, and items that would just be a regular sort of moving item. Something like we read about yeast as another one, where, I mean, that's a product that was relatively easy to predict volume. You would have peaks at sort of fall baking and then the holidays, and we would have probably another slight peak at Easter. But overall, the volume on items like that was fairly predictable. Well, that has all changed. We've had a big shift in the shopping basket. And so we have to allow for that in our sales forecasting. So part of it is that consumers are home. We've seen that a huge proportion of people are being told to stay home. And so they're doing things like more baking and more cooking. So that's changing the basket. So if your product is something that's an ingredient in baking, or an ingredient that people might be more likely to use in cooking, then you're probably going to see an increase in volume. So you have to allow for that. Now, we also see when it comes to the basket, we talked about trading down in the category. So I referenced earlier, people might go from the leading brand where there's a premium to, say, the second or third tier brand where it's a better price option. And we also probably will see people trading from perishable to non-perishable. So that's another way to try to reduce food waste. So instead of buying fresh fruits, they may trade to frozen fruits, or they may trade to canned fruits or canned veg. Instead of buying corn on the cob, which if the economy was going on good, the way that it was, and it was forecast for a nice weekend, you might say, oh, I'm going to have some corn. It's US corn, but it's a bit of a treat to have some corn on the cob with a barbecue on the weekend. They may say, no, we're going to have canned corn now. So there's going to be some changes within the shopping basket, which you have to factor in. Then we're also going to have issues on continuity of supply. And I think this is a reality we have to face in the food industry. We're hearing news now about meat processing plants in Canada and the US that are being shut down. We have workers who are experiencing either being tested positive for the virus. So when that happens and public health gets involved, then a lot of times the co-workers of that person are being told to self-isolate. So all of a sudden, a total shift in a plant has been impacted because one or two people might have tested positive. So if we don't have extra workers in the industry, which is a challenge, we're going to face interruptions in supply. And we're also going to face interruptions in supply with imported products. So the natural is olive oil. You look at the devastation in Italy, and I can't believe that in Italy right now, they're really that focused on producing olive oil to ship to Canada. It's probably just not a priority, and we can't blame them for that. They have other priorities. So continuity of supply within your category is something to think about. And we're going to see imported products from all over the world. And my estimate in Canada is that we probably import about 30% of the food that we consume in Canada. And when I check Statistics Canada, the numbers are probably 10, 12 years old. So that might have changed, but the last numbers they reported was about 30% of our food in Canada is imported. And of that, probably half of it comes from the United States. So that translates into about 17% of our food in Canada comes from the United States. So there's no doubt in categories that we will see interrupted supply. And whether it's because they have issues in the facility, like I referenced earlier, where people are testing positive and they have to shut it down, or we've also seen where employees don't want to come to work because they feel that the physical distancing within the food production facility is not safe. And they're saying, we're not going to come to work in this environment until we make changes. And also it's slowing down. Sometimes production processing facilities are implementing the physical distancing, which is the right thing to do to protect the safety of employees, but it slows down production because you just can't get as much done as you used to be able to do. So we're going to see interruptions in supply. And I think we have to be realistic about that. So understand in your category, if you go back to the olive oil, for example, so if we're going to see interruptions in olive oil supply, then if you're a supplier of vegetable oil or canola oil or something like that, people are going to trade within the category to your product. So we have to be prepared for that. We're also going to see challenges on logistics with imported products. We know that the border can be a problem. And unfortunately, when you see in Canada, our biggest trading partner cut off the supply of medical equipment, which seemed to be resolved. But if that's the strategy that they're going to employ, we may see the same on food if shortages get going in the United States. We may see that in the past, they produced 10,000 cases and perhaps 3,000 cases went to Canada. Well, if they've only produced 7,000 cases, it's likely they're going to satisfy their own customers first. So that we may just have to accept that as a reality. So if you are looking within your category, you need to understand what percent of products are imported and will there be interruptions in supply, because it may shift and your products might actually end up picking up some of that increased demand when there's a shortage on the shelf. And the other thing that's hard to predict is this demand that we're facing. And it's so hard for retailers and suppliers to figure out how our consumers going to react. It's very difficult. We also see that there could be impacts of pricing. And I know in Canada, we've had a lot of conversations about trying to eliminate and really fight against price gouging. And I know in Ontario, there was one example where a retailer did have a product priced inexorbitantly high, and the Premier made an example of it. And in Canada, I think we will continue to see the market force for products to stay reasonably priced. But we also have to understand that food is supply and demand. And if the supply reduces and the demand goes up, then the price will probably go up. So there will be some fluctuations in pricing. So you need to try to look at that and say, will that impact my product positively or negatively? And then the whole labor issue, that we just know that we probably don't have enough people working in the food industry today, whether it's on the production processing side or whether it's on the retail side. So there's going to be some challenges of getting food right through the whole system. So there will be some interruptions in supply because of labor as well. And the last thing that I share with you is, I really encourage you in this period that you really have to talk to your customers and really try to get a sense. And we understand their crystal ball is no better than your crystal ball, but they are talking to the people in the stores. They're talking to what's going on in the front lines to try and hear what consumers are saying. And they also have the movement data. And we know that that's such a critical piece of the puzzle, trying to understand what really is selling through the front end of those stores. And where you're really being asked to stay out of the stores, and we have to respect that, you can talk to your customers now a little bit more, because if they're saying stay out of the stores and you're respecting that, then you really need to be able to say to them, can you help me understand what is going on in the stores? And perhaps they'll be a little bit more likely to share information with you and help you to truly understand what is going on. And also, one of the other experiences that I've found lately is a lot of category managers are working from home, the same as many of us are. And they have a different work schedule now than they did. In the past, they might have been in a 6-hour meeting every Tuesday or so. Well, those are not happening now because they're all working remotely. So you can perhaps communicate a little differently with them and tell them you're working on your sales forecast and here's all the factors that you're trying to consider. Is there anything that they would have to add to that or to supplement what you're trying to do to help you improve the accuracy of your ability to predict the forecast, the sales that you're going to do? And really, it's in their best interest that you have the right amount of product to supply them. And that's the challenge in all this. Not too much and not an out of stock. So how do you try to get as close as you can to the right amount? So talk to your customers, see what they're saying. And I'm sure many of them are going to be interested to try to help you predict your sales as accurately as you can. So now what I'd like to do is, I mentioned I'm going to walk you through an example. So I'm going to get out of this part of the presentation and I'm going to now open up my Excel sheet, which I built for you. And we're going to just walk through a quick example of how to consider all this. And I keep using the word crystal ball, and we know that we don't have a perfect one, but we have to take the information we have and try to figure out what the best solution is. So in my example here, you can see I've picked an item that has 12,000 cases per month of volume. And you just put your number in there, whatever number you have. And so what our sheet does is it now populates that 12,000 as a starting point. So what we need to do now is look at all the different factors we've discussed, and perhaps there's others too that are unique to your category, but let's just go down through them and we'll put in some numbers and we'll try to understand what's going to happen with this item that we said was 12,000 cases for the month. And perhaps what I'll do, we need to probably pick a specific item so that we can talk some specifics here for this. So let's say that this product is cheese. We'll pretend that this is a cheese that is sold, excuse me, in the dairy section. So we can see what's the impact from food service to retail. So overall, we're saying about a 28% shift or increase for products at retail before. Now, probably that's overstated some for an item like cheese. I'm not sure that, cheese was probably used more at food service than consumers would actually use it in their home. And the classic example is French fries, of course, where we know that's a huge food service item and people just are not going to consume that amount of French fries at home. But I'm going to put in the number 10% here. So I'm going to suggest that because of the shift from restaurants to cooking at home, that we're going to see a 10% increase in the cheese volume during the period of time that restaurants are shuttered. So you can see our sheet, it changed that new sales estimate to 13,200 for the month. Now, the next thing we have to do is look and say, what was the impact of the hoarding that happened in March? And I'm not sure. I mean, we had, if you think of cheese, there was some stockpiling, but not a huge amount. So I'm going to say that it was probably going to impact our volume by say -4%, because people did stock up some, and there's going to be some period of time. The shelf life on cheese is pretty long, so people might have bought 3 or 4, and now they're going to take some time to use it. So maybe about a 4% decrease in the upcoming period of time while people work through what they had stockpiled. So now let's talk about the shopping trips. So the fact that consumers are going to stores less and buying less, or transactions, fewer transactions in the food stores than what we were used to. And so what is the impact on cheese for that? Perhaps it's going to hurt us by about 5%, because that was an item where people would be in the stores frequently. Dairy is a section that people shop a lot, and they go up and down that aisle, and they may just go by and say, oh, we're going to have cheese, we're going to have cheese. So so I'm going to say that that's going to hurt us only 5%. It's not going to hurt us 30% or anything like that, because people are buying bigger orders now. But we do have to accept that we're going to lose some things. So online shopping. So how is that affecting us in cheese? So I think that overall, that people, the retailers can pick the right amount of cheese and that kind of thing. So I don't think that's going to be a huge issue. Now, as long as we're in stock, we're probably going to get the volume. Now, the only problem is perhaps our cheese is not the #1 brand. So in the past, if somebody didn't like the price of the leading brand, we might have got the volume. And so we're not going to get those substitution buys, which we might have in the past. And we know we have a pretty good loyal group of people who buy our products. So I actually don't think that online shopping, the fact that it's grown to over 10% of the market, I don't think it's really going to impact our volume up or down. So I'm just going to leave that one at 0. And next one is consumer confidence. Now I think this one is going to hurt us some, because cheese is a little bit more, it's an ingredient in some things, but it's also cheese and crackers, and it's a kind of an extra thing. People might just, it's a snack kind of thing as opposed to sort of a basic meal ingredient. So I think actually the consumer confidence might actually hurt us by about 5%, because I think people are going to just maybe not buy as much as they used to, because it's maybe more of a treat as opposed to kind of a basic thing. Now, as far as the shopping basket, so how is that changing? The fact that people are at home, they're cooking more, they're baking more. I think that that actually helps us in the cheese category, because I think people may be looking for items where they're trying to do it and they're going to make it at home. So we might actually get a little bit of a bump. So let's say we're going to get a 2%, sorry, I just entered that in there wrong, a 2%, whoops, a 2% bump in that. So that's going to help us a little bit. Now, as far as continuity of supply, so a lot of cheese is made in Quebec, in Canada, and perhaps they're going to have some interruptions in supply there. So it might hurt them some, because they're having some of the biggest impacts with the virus in Quebec. So perhaps there are going to be interruptions in supply. So I'm going to say that the fact that we know that we've got a great inventory, that we're able to meet all of our deliveries, we're getting our product to the retailers when they want it. So we're going to probably say that actually is going to help us, because we know we're going to be in stock and we're going to be there for our customers. Now, what is the customer telling us? And this one here, I didn't reach out to any retailers and ask them about this. I keep trying to respect the fact that they're busy right now. So I'm probably just going to leave it at 0. So you can see that when we go down through our sheet here, that after all is said and done, we had started with a sales estimate of 12,000. And even though we've had some ups and downs, we've said, we're going to have an increase because of some things, a decrease because of some others, we actually settle out around 12,250 cases. So it's a slight increase based on where we were at. But it's important to go through each of the pluses and minuses, because we can't just say it's just the shift from food service to retail. Oh, we're going to be up 10%. No, we're not going to be up 10%. We have to factor it all in. So hopefully that template is a great help to you. It's not a complicated spreadsheet. There's no pivot tables or anything like that in there. And I did leave room for you to put your own if there's something unique that you see as helping. I think one thing here, which I haven't really covered, but perhaps could be something you would factor in, is if your product is produced in Canada. And I think we're seeing a shift where consumers are more interested in Canadian products. They're more interested in buying food that they know where it comes from. And I think that's been a trend, but I think that's heightened now with the situation that we're in. So perhaps that's something that if I put that down here in our sheet, maybe that was worth 5% to you. So all of a sudden our sales forecast goes from 12,000 to 12,860. So have a look, work with the different things on the sheet, and I really hope that it becomes a tool that you can use within your business. And that's what we're all about here at SKUFood, is trying to find ways to help you with your food business, make your food business better, and really try to remove some of the guesswork for you. So if I go back to my my presentation here now, I just have one last thing that I wanted to say. Two things, actually. One is I've been trying to end with some good news stories, and I just saw recently, I've referenced a couple times the shift from food service to retail, and French fries as an example. So where Maclean Foods, who obviously are a huge French fry producer in Canada, have donated 20 million pounds of potatoes to food banks across Canada, because they know that they just are not going to be able to produce these into French fries. The market is just not there for them right now. So that's another example of one of our Canadian food businesses really taking a situation which is really crappy. I mean, the reality is that they have lost a huge amount of volume in their business, but instead of just walking away from it, they've taken the initiative to donate that product to food banks so that Canadians who are hungry will be able to benefit from it. So, and there's examples of food businesses stepping up from one end of the value chain right through to the final piece with the consumer. And I think we have to be so proud of our food industry and how it's stepped up. And if you want my opinion, I feel that some of our other industries in Canada have not stepped up nearly as well as the food industry. And I just think it's great to be a part of it. And it actually motivates me in my work to just see the work that people are doing to try to help consumers in need, be collaborative, find solutions. So I'm going to keep trying to share those good news stories with you. And if you have a good news story, I'd love to hear about it so that I can share it. And I encourage you, celebrate your employees. They come up with some of these great ideas, and who knows whose idea that was at McCain's, but you know, celebrate your employees. People in the market, they want to hear some good news. I mean, you look at the news right now, and it's sort of challenge after challenge after. And so share some good news and help people understand. And we have phenomenal people stepping up across other sectors, but I think it's important for people to understand that the food industry, from one end of the value chain to the other, has really stepped up to supply food to Canadians. So if you're part of that, I say thank you. We're trying to do our part here at SKUFood by doing these recipes for success to help you in your food business during these challenging times. And next week, we're going to talk about generating sales in this new environment. And that's a challenge. It is a challenge. I referenced off the top that we're shopping in a new world, but we have to look for where are the opportunities. And I referenced in my newsletter I sent out this week that I had to do it in my own business at SKUFood. I had plans for 2020, and they're not going to come to fruition because of what's happened, which is reality. So I've had to accept that, try to change the plan, and rejig the business so that it is of value to the people who I try to serve. So we're going to talk next week about generating sales. We're going to get the webinar thing fixed so that we can do it live, and we'll be there to discuss it. And I'm looking at some different options to get you more involved with generating some of those sales ideas. So I really hope you can join us on Wednesday, April 22nd at 2 p.m. Atlantic, 1 p.m. Eastern, where we will cover off generating sales in this new shopping environment that we're in. So thanks very much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being a part of it. It's great that you're participating and trying to look for the opportunities in your food business. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.